there's a lot of people today that will never own their own house. They won't have that asset to sell. It's very difficult to get on the housing ladder now. Having to save 10, 20, 30,000 pounds for a deposit is just not feasible for some people. So the point how this relates back to the social care thing is they're not going to have that asset to sell. And therefore, the £86,000 cap will be gone in a matter of years.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Money Matters feature. It could well be the final episode of the Money Matters features due to things that are going on in the background in the financial industry. Lots of plates are being juggled. Maybe my services will be better placed elsewhere. I know everyone who subscribes to this podcast, subscribes to this YouTube channel will be devastated, but don't worry, don't fear. We've got a wonderful feature coming up with wonderful Ryan, and of course I'm sure we will be providing content for the channel in the not too distant future, but maybe we have a temporary break. But hey, Ryan, if we are to be breaking like it potentially will happen, what a way to go out, because we've got you on.
Great charity, great organisation to finish with. Yeah, thank you for having us on today.
Absolutely not a problem, not a problem. I did say to Ryan beforehand, I do have a habit of sometimes getting the wrong end of the stick, so it would be quite funny if you were on next week. You think, did he just say that last week? Just have to blank it, from your mind as though it never happened. Some good editing will help. But of course, I do. Again, I would like to say, and it will entice you in to think that Ryan's the last one. So if you keep saying that every week, we'll get viewer boostage on the YouTube channel. Like, oh, we have to watch. It's the last one. And
sounds good for us.
It sounds good for both of us. Fantastic. So during the apparent introduction that I was giving, I was probably waffling so much, so the power went out on Ryan's street actually, and the lights went off, the street everything went off. He cut from this feed. Hence why there was probably a savvy cut just then, if you didn't notice. Hopefully you didn't, but now I've just explained it to you. It's there, so eyes peeled and that. Probably more obvious than I'm thinking it might be. It's so obvious you think, well, you didn't need to explain it. But he's there, he's here. Ryan, tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about the charity.
So yeah, I'm Ryan Anderton. I'm the co-founder of It's Worth Talking About. It's Worth Talking About is a peer support mental health organisation based in West Yorkshire. We set up in March 2020 after the sudden and unexpected suicide of a friend of lots of my friends, somebody that I didn't actually know, but I was working in mental health at the time and realised that more support services were needed in our area. So It's Worth Talking About started as just one men's group in Keighley, and very quickly spiraled out of control throughout COVID, mainly through the misfortune of a lot of people and a lot of families. There was quite a lot of young deaths in and around our area, and that led to us opening more men's groups, women's groups, and we now have a youth group as well for 13 to 16-year-olds. So we really are sort of providing a lot of support to local people, men, women, children, in and around the Bradford, Keighley, Bingley area of West Yorkshire.
Yeah, tremendous, really, what you do. I mean, actually, as a preface, I mean, we said this actually, or I've said this before on other interviews that we've done on other features where people have set up initiatives like this and they say, but we didn't really want to. It was a necessity. And actually in your bio, you even said it's a shame that we have to do this, but we do have to do this. From your perspective then, and again, it's a question I ask and I feel it's pertinent to ask, there just isn't really enough support from the state or free support available, is there, for people in these difficult positions to start with? Hence why you are taking on so much responsibility yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot of mental health support about, especially through the charitable sector. The NHS, whether it be A&E, the mental health wards, or the GP practices, do some really, really good work, but they're completely inundated with requests for GP appointments, or people that turn up at A&E looking for instant answers and instant support, that they just can't cope. So it is unfortunate and regrettable, and it's worth talking about. And many of the other mental health organisations that are out there shouldn't really exist, but people need quick, fast, local, accessible support. And at the moment, through the NHS, that's not available.
No, fair point. And like you say, it's worth mentioning that the existing support that is there with people who work in as specialists in mental health is generally very good. But of course, it's getting hold of that. It's difficult, especially as you can imagine with the backlog in the NHS, a huge backlog on mental health services as well. You said, actually, you touched on the pandemic, and it's something that we're sort of coming out of now. And you said that actually it's worth talking about really spiraled in a good way, or sort of got bigger as a result of the pandemic. Do you think that's because, I mean, it seems quite obvious, but the lack of face-to-face interaction really was a critical thing for so many people, and it really opened up a lot of, I suppose, anxieties and wounds that maybe people didn't think were there?
Yeah, I think that throughout the first lockdown, the amount of worry, the amount of anxiety over this killer bug that made us all stay inside and wear masks, and we can only go to the supermarkets and pubs and restaurants and football clubs, and all our sort of day-to-day well-being, social activities all stopped. So we were confined, and I think that led to a lot of worries. I think it led to a lot of people being socially isolated, and from attending the groups, it led to people being almost smothered. They were with their children and their partners 24/7, and whilst we say that we'd love to be with our partners and our children all the time, when the reality comes, it becomes too much for a lot of people, and they needed a place to escape, something to go back home to talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely fair. Sometimes the simple things really are the things that affect us the most. And like you say, just having that ability to go over and the things we took for granted, essentially, that were no longer available and could no longer be taken for granted, were taken away. And then suddenly, you know, existing problems become 2-3 times bad. Because like you say, of course, you could discuss an existing problem over a coffee, go to the pub, something like that. But you obviously couldn't do that in that period. And that's a very fair point, and obviously why your charity started to develop and started to grow. In terms of, we're of course a financial advice firm, debt advice firm. We look at often the link between financial hardship and mental health hardships or personal hardship. Do you find that with a lot of the people that do use your services, that there is often maybe a financial backbone behind that, where someone's fallen off the rails and has got into mental health? Or do you think sometimes it's the opposite, where maybe, you know, someone who's in bad mental health position then gets themselves into a bad financial position as a result of their own makeup? Absolutely.
I think finances and having good finances is key to having good mental health. The cliche is that money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy comfort, and it does buy the opportunity to be able to do certain things. And we have lots of attendees that come to our groups that, through having poor finances, are struggling with their well-being, whether it be that they're on a low income wage, or that they're struggling through on benefits or the personal independence payments, and struggling to access finances that will allow them to be more comfortable. On the flip side of that, we've also got people that are in a good financial state, and throughout COVID, due to not having those things that we've just mentioned, going out to football, pubs, restaurants, etc., became alcohol dependent, or became gambling addicts, or dabbled in drugs, because they needed something to fill a gap that throughout COVID wasn't present.
Yeah, no, that's a that's looking at two ends, really, two ends of the spectrum. I mean, let's take it back to the ones without finance then, and you say, well, the old cliche, money can't buy happiness, but it actually can actually do something substantial in that it can provide, it can sort of ease, I guess, problems instead of exacerbating other problems. How to pay the rent, how to look after the family, can I afford enough for food or a good level of food for the family this week, all of those kind of things. And even more so, I suppose, I've heard stories actually of when the NHS backlog really is so big and you can't turn to that. Many turn to private forms of counselling. And actually, I've heard many stories about, oh, private counselling is very, very good. Don't know what I would have done without private counselling. I imagine it is. But that is a luxury, I suppose, only aimed at a select few with the ability and the appreciation to be able to afford that, and that's not available, I suppose, for the vast majority. So I don't know, is that something maybe that, I don't know if you've ever experienced personally the advantages of private counselling of any kind. I know that it's quite a popular thing in certain areas, in certain social circles. Do you think that the quality that they provide, it's just out of reach, isn't it, for a lot of people, unfortunately, not to do your charity a disservice?
No, absolutely not. My co-founder, Andy, he runs a private counselling practice in Oxenhope, which is where me and Andy were both brought up as children. We're childhood friends. He provides a great service to many people that have the disposable income and the real need and desire to be able to talk through what their life challenges are on a one-to-one basis, on a regular basis, to really drill down effectively to the root cause of their challenges so that they can find solutions to it quick and easy through having that disposable income. A lot of people don't have that, and they rely on the 10 minutes you get with a GP. They rely on the charitable sector to provide a willing listening ear and some guidance in regards to well-being and finances. And Citizens Advice Bureau, for example, are fantastic. They provide some great solutions, but again, they're hard to access. So people without the finances to access support rely on people like us.
Yeah, and then you talk on the flip side as well about those with finances who then we shouldn't assume that they will then spend their money on the right services. In fact, you say, as you said in the lockdown, to supplement or subsidize the lack of interaction face to face, which we weren't allowed, they would then go to drugs, alcohol, even gambling. Would have been online, of course. Yep. But all of those, I mean, it shows, doesn't it, actually, that I guess when they're in those positions, do you then see people and their finances, their stable finances, spiral out of control then? So then from their point of view, they start in the personal hardship side of it, like we were discussing before. And then by the end of that real personal struggle, they end up in financial hardship because that stable income they had is now just disintegrated, gone away.
Yeah, it does. And the knock-on effect of having stable finances that then start to become more rocky, then leads on to that spiraling effect again of affecting family, affecting friends, and we've seen it. We've seen breakups of relationships and the loss of trust through friends, through over gambling and drinking and taking drugs. And once you hit that slippery slope, sometimes it's really hard to find your way back out of that hole.
Yeah, we've actually done features on this channel where we've looked at gambling addiction and alcohol addiction and drug addiction. And like you say, it comes in different forms. There's sometimes where, well, it comes in different forms, but also often interlinked, as I say, with the mental health problems as well, which is how people deviate away from other people, I suppose, and into those particular areas. And it's not, I mean, it's terrible, really. It's terrible to see, and it can be a huge struggle. And commend all the people who've been on here and talked about that, because many of them themselves had been in had been in a life of addiction at some point. I think of Pastor Mick, the first person we had on here, who does a wonderful thing with Church on the Street, been on Northwest Tonight and BBC News. He himself was a drug addict. He was heavily involved with alcohol as well. He turned his life around and now he helps those people out. But it can be, as he says, very, very difficult to overcome that, and not only overcome that, but actually help others in that situation based on that experience.
It's like Steve and Matthew from Hopeless Not Homeless, or Homeless Not Hopeless.
Homeless Not Hopeless.
I can never remember which way it goes, but yes, they'll deal with a lot of people that if they'd have had some form of support from organisations like us, or better support from the NHS on the streets today, they may have been able to find answers and solutions and come away from the challenges that they were facing at that point in a better place instead of being on the street.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. One thing that came out in the news this week actually was there's quite a big thing on social care actually. Now, social care, a thing that affects everyone, because we don't know when we'll need, or if we will need to have it in our lifetimes. Now, the government announced this week that they put an £86,000 cap on social care expenses. So if anyone was to go into that position when they are older, some people, of course, some people who are suffering financial hardship might be getting to a point where they are then maybe incapable, or going to, or know someone who's close to them who's incapable of looking after themselves. They will have to go into a care home. There's now been a reform. It is better than it was, because what it was a catastrophe. I think everyone knows that. We will all be aware that the social care problem before was essentially you had a very low barometer of assets or financial assets before the government basically intervened and helped. So basically that meant that you were paying the majority of the social care fees for a very long period of time, so much so that you'd often lose your home and most of the assets with you. Now, I don't know what you make of the £86,000 thing that's been brought in, the cap, because even though that's better because there is now a cap, which there wasn't before, and the assets that you can own before government intervention's actually gone up. So again, that's a good thing too. But still a lot of people, particularly in the north, that will inevitably have to sell their home if anyone gets into this position. I mean, when we look at social care, when we look at how the state helps us in later life and helps us throughout our lives, it's no wonder, isn't it, really, that we find ourselves, struggling mentally throughout life, because we don't always have that support. And when we get to an age where we might have worked and paid taxes for a very long period of time, it's not always there, is it?
No, well, I think that brings up a really good point in regards to why mental health is on the increase at the moment as well. In that, in years gone by, generations gone by, my parents own their own house. My grandparents owned their own house. My great-grandparents owned their own house.
I know where this is going.
There's a lot of people today that will never own their own house. They won't have that asset to sell. It's very difficult to get on the housing ladder now. Having to save 10, 20, 30,000 pounds for a deposit is just not feasible for some people. So the point how this relates back to the social care thing is they're not going to have that asset to sell. And therefore, the £86,000 cap will be gone in a matter of years. So I just don't see it being practical, and just doesn't work.
No.
For future generations. Yeah,
I mean, as I say, and there was a lot of criticism for this reform. What came in, it is better than the previous system, which says a lot about the previous system. Because the previous system, there was no cap. So after 86,000, you'd be paying more and more and more, and you'd never stop until you had so little asset left that essentially the government would then intervene. But by that point, it'd be pointless. Now, it does seem, I do feel, again, and we touch on this, maybe middle class livers, people with 400,000 houses, 350,000, 500,000 houses, they will benefit. It's not just the wealthy, the mega rich. We talk, the mega rich will benefit, of course, because 86,000 out of the 1 million wealth of asset. Well, it's still got 14,000 left, if I got my maths there correct. And obviously, if you've got a 500,000 house or 400,000 house, that's middle class living generally these days. Again, you could downsize and move into a fairly comfortable apartment. But then if you're in the north and your house is 110,000 or 120,000, you're not going to get a house for 40,000. It's not like that anymore, is it? You can't just downsize. Now you're looking at getting equity out of the house, and that becomes really complicated, doesn't it, when it comes to things like that?
It does. And just to repeat my point is that there's a pressure on this generation of whereby they won't own their own houses. They won't have that equity, them assets to be able to fund future social care.
I imagine as well that there will be there probably will over time be a reform to the reform, because this reform seems to be aimed, as I say, at the more elderly folk. Again, for people like myself, 23 years old, and then people who around that age, I suppose we theoretically wouldn't be thinking about the social care costs until 30, 35, 40 years down the line. So for us, I suppose right now, it doesn't matter too much in that respect. But I imagine when we are getting to that age, then they might have to rethink again just exactly where that cap goes.
Yeah, this generation your generation in 40 years' time will need to be looking at who we vote for in regards to trying to change that reform for how the generation's finances have changed.
I have a feeling who I might not be voting for, but I won't be saying it on here because I'm politically neutral, obviously. But we'll go back to your initiative, obviously, or your setup. It's worth talking about. Usually I ask a question in regards to, I like to go a bit more in depth in personal. What is one achievement from It's Worth Talking About, or one story that you'd like to share that really stands out above the rest with regards to your setup? What are you most proud of? One thing.
Our volunteers, the facilitators of our groups are the people that make our groups run. I set it up with my friend Andy, but we're two men. We run women's groups. We need women to run the women's groups. We need women's support to run the youth groups that we have. We have the support of mothers and grandmothers and wives and girlfriends to support what is a really huge cause in regards to the high numbers of male suicides that are still rising. The volunteers make all those differences. They're the real success of It's Worth Talking About. They're what continues to make us grow.
Very nice, very well put. Is there any particular individual that you've helped that stands out above the rest? Not to discredit the rest of them, but is there any one name as such that you can?
Yes, yeah, by a million miles. And there's one guy, David. David attends our Haworth group. He now sort of co-runs the group as well. He attended the group in May of last year after sadly losing his wife to suicide in April, just a month after COVID kicked in. She was suffering from quite severe anxiety. And in the last couple of days, David's, throughout the year, David has been sort of asking why and could he have done anything different. And he's very recently pinpointed that coming down to the female menopause and how that combined with COVID really hit her hard, and she had nobody to talk to. There wasn't groups, there were groups for women available to go to, but it was COVID, so you couldn't. And yeah, all that came together and she took her own life. And how David has been so honest and open and forthright and vulnerable at times when he's at the groups, but also how openly vocal he is about encouraging men and women to talk about mental health. I take my hat off to David. He is an absolute star, and I'm very, very proud to call him a friend.
It's really touching, actually, and it's sadly not the first suicide that I've heard on these features, and there will be many more, unfortunately. But hopefully, as you say, really, with things like this, opening up with things like this, learning about groups like this, hopefully we can cut it down. And what's really interesting is we've had a few people on here talking about men's mental health, and so on. But you quite rightly touch on it there. Female mental health is also really important. Women's mental health is just as important as men's. As I think with the men's mental health, we often talk about toxic masculinity and how it used to be in the past, and the stiff upper lip. And that's never been quite as prevalent, stereotypically at least, with women. But that doesn't mean that women don't suffer the same level of mental health. And I suppose, in this case as well, sometimes women don't know who to talk to either. Maybe they feel isolated. Maybe they don't have as many friends as they let on. I mean, stereotypically, again, female groups, there tends to be, while there's a lot of discussion and open discussion and quite a lot of conversation from a stereotypical perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's really deep, open, honest discussion. It could be related to anything, couldn't it?
Yeah. I work 2 days a week as a health coach and as part of a GP practice. And statistically, 80% of patients that come to A&E or to a medical practice to see their GP are women. So women actively seek support more than men, at a ratio of 80 to 20. But then it comes down to the suicides, and that's 75 to 25%, with men dying more frequently through suicide. So it's quite obvious that men need to talk more before they reach the critical stages of action that is obviously happening in the UK. But if we can encourage women to talk more openly in groups like ourselves, then GP practices will be able to, the capacity of GP practices will increase, because the number of women attending GP practices in A&E with anxieties and depressions and the menopause, which is something I never thought of, is significantly higher. So it's just as important for women to attend groups like these as it is for men.
Yeah. Lasting question then. I think you do a wonderful job anyway. I think what you've done is tremendous. Your social media reach is very good. You post some wonderful things on Facebook. So all of that's very positive. But where do you want to go in the next few months? Maybe, I don't want to say next few years because we don't even know. I mean, I say throughout this pandemic, you say, where do you want to be in the next few weeks? And we don't know if we're going to be in another lockdown. Touch wood, doesn't look like we are going to be, but you don't know. You see the rest of Europe. So where do you want to be maybe short term, next few weeks, next few months? Where do you see yourself taking It's Worth Talking About? Or what are your aims?
Well, up until the new year, we're just consolidating on what we've got and making sure that we are looking after the people on our doorsteps. We don't really have any ambitions to be a national organisation. However, if opportunities do arise, we will talk about them. And we will listen to the people who want to participate in It's Worth Talking About. Ultimately, my goal for It's Worth Talking About is for us to cover West Yorkshire. We want to have our extended doorstep covered. We know that there's people struggling in all areas of the country, but we feel that we will benefit more people by looking after where we know, and really making mental health accessible locally, and that includes having more women's groups, more men's groups, and primarily I want to really dig into this youth mental health, young people's mental health, because that's where we will make a real impact in trying to provide wellness tools and resilience and coping strategies to our young people so that when they are older, they're prepared for what life has to throw at them. So
it's all about chasing sustainability then, essentially.
Yes.
by ingraining it in at a young age. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm also an advocate that not only for financial education and general life education, there should be more of it within schools anyway, I think, before, in a general discussion. But it's wonderful that you're thinking about providing those seeds at an early age again, because as you say, you bed it in at an early age, you don't have the problems in later life, and then hopefully generally. I mean, a good society, a good mental health across society in future years probably leads to less crime, probably leads to less alcoholism, less drug addiction, etc., etc. And unfortunately, then it'd be a proactive approach to a lot of the problems we face in society, as opposed to a reactive approach where more police, more this, more that, harsher punishments. So it would be nice to see that come into play. And I think that's a wonderful way to finish, really, on sustainability, on focusing on the future, long-term progression, as opposed to, just, well, I think it's a wonderfully put thing, and from a wonderfully put man and a wonderfully organized organization. I don't think I could have said wonderfully too much more there. Need more synonyms in future. That is probably one of my favorite words, but there we go. Fantastic.
I like amazing and awesome.
Amazing.
Those
and
are
awesome.
My favorite too.
Well, yeah. That's an amazing synonym to use in future. I'll definitely try and do that. But thanks a lot for talking to me, Ryan. Good luck with the future. And thanks for watching all of these, by the way. Support's meant a lot. Really do appreciate to all of the watchers, comments, and personal messages to me. Might be back in the future. Might be doing different things. Keep subscribed to the channel, and we'll see what happens. That's all I can say. I don't want to preempt anything. Crazy world we're living at the moment. See you next time. Well, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to smash the like button, give us a nice comment, and most importantly, hit the subscribe bell. You hit the subscribe bell, it means you can just keep up to date with all of the latest features that come on this channel, whether that be Money Matters or something else associated with Money Support Group. Hit the subscribe bell. Until next time, thanks for listening, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your week.